I didn't lose him in a fight. I didn't lose him to another woman. I lost him slowly, quietly, the way you lose feeling in your fingers on a cold night. You don't even notice it's gone until you reach for something and realize you can't hold it anymore. And what I lost wasn't just him, I lost myself. If you have ever loved someone so deeply that you forgot where they ended and you began, stay with me. This is my story. I've never told it out loud before, not like this, not all of it, because for a long time, I didn't have the words. And before that, I didn't have the courage. And before even that, I didn't even fully understand what had happened to me. I'm sharing this because somewhere out there, right now, someone is sitting in a relationship that doesn't feel violent, doesn't feel dramatic, doesn't look broken from the outside. But on the inside, she is disappearing, piece by piece, quietly, and nobody around her even knows. This is for her. This is for you. If this story touches something in you, something you've been carrying alone, please share it. Leave a comment, because you'd be surprised how many people are watching in silence, feeling the exact same thing, thinking they're the only one. You're not. I promise you, you are not the only one. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, back to the autumn I met the most beautiful disaster of my life. I was 26 years old, and I had just started believing that maybe, just maybe, my life was finally going somewhere. I had grown up in a small farming town where the biggest excitement of the week was the Saturday market. My mother grew tomatoes, my father fixed engines, and I read every book I could get my hands on, dreaming about a world bigger than the one outside my window. When I finally moved to the city to work as an editorial assistant at a small literary magazine, I felt like I had stepped into the life I had always quietly been writing for myself. I wasn't rich. My apartment was the size of a generous closet. I ate a lot of toast, but I was free, and I was building something. And every morning when I walked into that little magazine office with its mismatched chairs and its walls covered in words, I thought, this is it. This is exactly where I am supposed to be. He walked into my life on a book fair on a Saturday in October, the kind of October that smells like cinnamon and old paper and everything good. I was standing at a poetry table, half reading a collection I couldn't afford to buy, and he appeared beside me and said, without any introduction, without any warning, "That one will wreck you," in the best way. I looked up. He was tall, well-dressed, but not stiff, with the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't announce itself. He smiled like he had all the time in the world. He managed a boutique hotel nearby, he told me later. He had grown up in the same kind of small town I had. He liked handwritten letters and slow mornings and films with no explosions in them. I was gone before I even knew I was falling. He called me 3 days after we exchanged numbers, not a text, a call, an actual phone call in a generation that treats phone calls like emergencies. His voice was calm and warm, and he asked me questions like he genuinely wanted the answers. He remembered that I mentioned my mother's name in passing. He remembered that I said I drank chamomile tea, not coffee. On our third date, he brought me a small paper bag with a box of chamomile tea inside and said, "Just in case you were out." I had never felt so seen in my life. My best friend Ren met him once in those early months and was quiet on the walk home in a way that I recognized but chose not to examine. Ren had always been sharp that way. She felt things about people before she could explain them. But I was so full of warmth, so saturated with the feeling of being chosen by someone like him, that I smiled and told her she just needed to get to know him better. She nodded. She didn't push. That was how Ren loved me. She said her piece and then stepped back and let me live my life. And my life in those months felt like the opening chapter of the kind of novel I had always wanted to read. He came to my office once with sunflowers, not roses, sunflowers, because I had mentioned once that roses felt like a performance, and my colleagues talked about it for a week. I walked around glowing like I had swallowed a small sun. But there was one evening, about 3 months in. We were at dinner with two of his friends, a couple, older than us, very polished, and somehow the conversation turned to writing, and I mentioned a short story I had been working on, something personal and strange and a little experimental. I was proud of it. I had been quietly proud of it for weeks. He looked at me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes and said, "It's a bit ordinary, honestly." Then he laughed, and his friends laughed, and he reached over and touched my hand and said, I'm joking. She's very talented." Everyone moved on. I laughed too. I laughed and changed the subject, and later that night, lying beside him in the dark, I told myself it was nothing. He was joking. He said so himself. People who love each other joke. That's normal. That's fine. I tucked the hurt somewhere small and quiet inside me. I closed a door over it. I didn't know then that I would spend the next 3 years closing doors over things, one after another, until the house inside me had no light left in it. A year after we met, I moved into his apartment. It made sense, practically. His place was bigger, closer to my office, and we were spending every night together anyway. My friends helped me carry boxes on a Sunday afternoon, and it felt exciting and grown up and right. The first thing he did while I was still unpacking was reorganize my bookshelf. I had a system, loose and emotional and entirely my own, the way books collect themselves in the life of someone who reads to survive. He arranged them by size and color, neat and clean and completely stripped of meaning. When I mentioned it gently, he looked genuinely puzzled. "It looks better this way," he said. "Doesn't it look better?" I looked at the shelf. Maybe it did look neater. Maybe I was being precious about it. "Yeah," I said, "it looks good." That sentence, "Yeah, it looks good," became the sentence of the next 3 years of my life, in different forms, about different things, about which restaurant we went to, about which friends we spent time with, about what I wore to his work events, about what opinions I offered and how loudly I offered them. He never raised his voice. That's what made it so hard to name. There were no slammed doors, no broken plates, no screaming matches. There was something much quieter and much more effective than that. There was the slight cooling of his eyes when I said something he didn't agree with. There was the long silence after I shared excitement about something, a silence that asked me to question whether the excitement was warranted. There was the way he would say, "Really?" when I told him about something I had done or wanted, with just enough of a pause before it to make me feel like maybe I was being foolish. I started editing myself before I even opened my mouth around him. I would think, will this bore him? Will this embarrass him? Is this too much? I became my own censor. And the cruelest part is that I did it so naturally, so gradually, that I didn't even feel it happening. I stopped calling Ren as much, not because he forbade it. He never forbade anything. He was far too intelligent for anything that obvious. But he had a way of describing her. "She's a lot, isn't she?" he'd say when her name came up. Or, "She always seems to be pulling you into some drama." He said it lightly, like an observation, not a command. But observations, repeated enough, become beliefs. I started to see Ren through his eyes, and through his eyes, she was too loud, too chaotic, too much. I pulled back. She noticed, but she was Ren. She waited. She knew me well enough to wait. I called my mother less. I stopped going home for the small visits I used to love, the Sunday lunches, the long walks through the fields my father had sold, but that we still walked out of habit. Those trips felt impossible to fit in when the atmosphere at home, his home that I had moved into but never fully occupied, would be cold for days after I came back from anywhere that was mine. He never said, "Don't go." He just became less warm when I did, and I had grown so dependent on his warmth by then, so calibrated to his moods, that his coldness felt like a physical thing, like stepping into a room with no heating in January. And through all of this, I was shrinking at work, too. I used to pitch story ideas in our morning meetings with a kind of reckless enthusiasm. Big ideas, strange ideas, ideas that sometimes landed and sometimes didn't, but always came from a real and fired up place inside me. After 2 years with him, I had stopped pitching anything bold. I stuck to the safe and the expected. My editor noticed, I think. She looked at me once during a meeting with something in her expression I couldn't name at the time, something between concern and disappointment. I looked away. Then came the offer. A respected publishing house in the city was looking for a senior editorial manager. A colleague forwarded me the posting with 3 exclamation points in the email. My editor encouraged me to apply. I applied almost in secret, barely letting myself believe it was possible, and when they called me in for a second interview and then a third and then finally offered me the position, I sat in a coffee shop bathroom for 10 minutes just breathing. That evening I came home and told him. He didn't smile. He tilted his head slightly and said, "Is that the right move, though? That's a lot of responsibility. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of pressure?" I told him I thought I was. He made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, something in between, and said, "I just don't want you to set yourself up to fail. I'm thinking about you." 3 weeks later, I called the publishing house and told them I needed more time. I said I wasn't ready. They were polite. They found someone else. That night, I sat on the edge of the bathtub and cried so quietly that my own reflection didn't look like it understood why. And I couldn't have explained it then, not clearly, not fully, but something in me knew. Something in me had started to know for a long time. I just wasn't ready to open all those closed doors yet. Rin found me. It was a Tuesday in February, gray and tired and cold, and she sent me a message that said only, "Coffee this week? I miss you. No agenda, just you." Something in me cracked open at those 4 words, "No agenda, just you." How long had it been since someone wanted me with no agenda? We met at a small cafe near my old apartment, the neighborhood I had lived in before I moved into his world, and I walked in feeling defensive without knowing what I was defending. But Rin didn't come at me with accusations. She just looked at me for a long moment and said, "You don't look like yourself, not for a long time now." I told her I was tired. I told her work was demanding. I told her everything except the truth. She nodded slowly and said, "I know you well enough to know when you're explaining something and when you're performing an explanation." I stared at my cup. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine and said quietly, without drama, "The woman sitting across from me right now is not the woman who moved to this city to build something. I just need you to know that I see that. You don't have to do anything with it. I just need you to know I see it." I held it together until I got to my car. Then I sat in the driver's seat and didn't move for a long time, just watching the street through the windshield, and something in me began to thaw that I hadn't even realized was frozen. That night I came home and told him the truth. Not the performed, edited, careful version, the real one. I told him I felt invisible. I told him I felt like I was constantly being managed down, my ambitions, my friendships, my voice. I told him that the woman I had been when he met me was barely recognizable to me now, and I needed him to tell me that he saw that it mattered, that we could change it. He was very quiet when I finished. Then he said in a calm, measured voice, "I don't know what you want from me. I have never asked you to give anything up. Everything you're describing, those were your choices. I can't be responsible for the choices you made." That was it. Those were the words. Not shouted, not cruel in their tone, just quiet and final and devastating in their precision. Your choices. As if the architecture of the last 3 years had been built by me alone, as if his cold silences and his careful doubts and his slow, patient erosion of my confidence had been nothing, had been invisible, had never happened. I realized, standing in that kitchen, that he was never going to admit it. Not because he was incapable of honesty, but because admitting it would require him to become someone who had done something wrong. And he had a story about himself, a very fixed, very certain story, and I was not going to change it. Not tonight, not ever. I went to the bedroom. I pulled a bag from under the bed. I packed one change of clothes, my journal, the book of poetry I had been reading the day I met him, my charger, my medication, and a photograph of my mother. I walked to the door. He was standing in the hallway watching, and I thought he was going to say something real, something that would make me put the bag down. He said nothing. I opened the door. I didn't slam it. There was something important to me in that, in leaving without breaking anything further. I pulled it shut behind me, gently, like I was putting something down with care. I sat in my car for 20 minutes in the dark, and I felt nothing, which was somehow the most frightening thing of all. Then I picked up my phone and called my mother. She picked up on the second ring the way she always did, like she had been waiting even when she had no reason to be, and I said, "Mom," just that, just the one word, and she said, "Come home, baby." 6 months later, I had my own apartment. It was small, smaller than I would have liked, with a radiator that clanked every morning and a bathroom window that didn't close all the way. But every single thing in it was mine. The books were on the shelf in my system, my emotional, personal, chaotic system, and nobody had touched them. I want to be honest with you about healing, because I think people make it sound cleaner than it is. I didn't wake up one morning feeling free and golden. I woke up most mornings feeling the particular emptiness of someone who has removed something that had become part of them, even if it was hurting them. Grief doesn't check whether the thing you're grieving was good for you. It just comes. But I did small things. Deliberately and carefully, I did small things. I called Rin, I called my mother, I went home for a weekend and walked the old fields with my father and said almost nothing and felt for the first time in years that silence could be safe. I planted a small pot of herbs on my kitchen windowsill, basil and mint, and watered them every morning like a promise to myself that I was capable of keeping something alive. I went back to writing, not for the magazine, not for anyone, just for the page. I wrote badly, and I wrote honestly, and some mornings I wrote things that made me put my pen down and stare at the ceiling because I finally understood something I hadn't been able to see when I was in the middle of it. He didn't hate me. That's the complicated part. I don't think he ever sat down and decided to diminish me. I think he was the kind of person who needed to be the most capable person in the room, and when I was ambitious and bright and reaching, something in him pulled at it, quietly, consistently, without drama, not with malice, maybe not even with awareness. And that doesn't make it less harmful. It just makes it harder to explain to someone who has never lived it. 6 months after I left, a smaller editorial role opened at a boutique imprint connected to the publishing world I had always wanted to enter. It wasn't the senior position I had turned down, but I applied with steady hands and interviewed without performing, and when they offered it to me, I said yes the same afternoon, standing in my little kitchen with the basil on the windowsill and the clanking radiator and the window that didn't close all the way. I said yes. Out loud, to myself, to the room, to no one in particular. I said yes. I want to say something to you directly now, to you, whoever you are, wherever you are watching this. If anything in this story felt familiar, not the details necessarily, but the feeling, the slow smallness, the constant editing of yourself, the way you stopped reaching for things because a certain look or a certain silence had taught you that reaching wasn't safe, please hear me when I say this. What happened to you is real. You do not need a bruise to prove damage. You do not need shouting to prove harm. Pain that leaves no visible mark is still pain, and the fact that it is quiet does not mean you imagined it. The bravest thing I ever did was not leaving. Leaving was hard, but it was one moment. The bravest thing I ever did was deciding, slowly, imperfectly, on an ordinary Tuesday with a clanking radiator and a cup of chamomile tea, that I was worth returning to. You are worth returning to. I didn't heal by forgetting him. I healed by remembering me. If this story reached something in you, please share it, not for the numbers, but because someone in your life might need to hear it today and doesn't know how to say so. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, told honestly, told fully, told without performance. And leave me a comment below. Tell me you're okay. Tell me you're working on it. Tell me you're just starting. I read every single one. And wherever you are tonight, I hope you find your way back to yourself. The way I did, quietly, slowly, one small true thing at a time.